You, Courtney, and special acknowledgement and thank you for being the one that said we really should do this series. It should be a whole series and lining all of us up to do it. So I'm really pleased to be part of the series, and it's answering key issues that people are always asking us about. So I'm glad we're getting this done. I'm assuming most people know me, but in case you don't, my name is Blair Hyatt. I'm the Senior Director of State Affairs at NHSA. I wanted to thank everyone for finding time to join us. And we're just glad to be here together thinking about probably the most important issue in the world of Head Start. Um, so a little bit about Head Start advocacy. We're in a funding crisis. The new final rule without funding um, leaves programs with having to cut large number of children and families in order to implement the new final rule. And as of right now, there is no large amount of money being offered to Head Start to do that. So if you wonder why are we thinking about advocacy, we'll just remember we're in a funding crisis. It's pretty simple. Um, and a little bit more about Head Start advocacy. We really want everybody, and we're going to try to talk about all different levels of advocacy. And we'll talk about the big fancy ones, but we're also going to talk about the most basic ones. Our government affairs team offers a variety of support to help with such things as site visits, talking to your members of Congress, talking points, and there's a really good toolkit about how to do a site visit, which means bringing a representative or a legislator or a county commissioner to your program. But not only do you have that resource, but feel free to reach out to us. We get questions all the time about how do I do this? How do I do that? And it's probably one of the most important things we do is help people build that capacity to do site visits and talk to their people. Before going to general advocacy, there's no way I can do this without talking about this is the election time. And now is the time, probably the most basic piece of being an advocate for yourself or your community or the people around you is to have people be registered to vote and then to have them vote in November. So I just need to make a plug for that. There is a link right there to a site that will help you figure out how to register to vote if you are not. Going back to where I started, appreciation for putting this series together. The first of this series was a total discussion about voter registration and voter advocacy, and all of it is recorded with resources, and the link to that on the NHSA website's right there. A little bit about what I hope to accomplish. We want people to understand how to be an advocate, what an advocate does, and how to do it within the limits of the Head Start standards. And there are a few things you need to be careful about, but I'm hoping that all of you walk out really confident that you can be relaxed and yourself and communicate and advocate for Head Start without worrying. Um, there's more specific things so that you know what these three words mean because they really matter in terms of what you're allowed to do with advocating and educating and lobbying. So we're going to talk very specifically about what those things are. Um, Then once we talk about them, we're going to talk about what are the regulations and the dirty, the very specific policy pieces so that if you need to look deeper and really understand, have a deeper understanding, you have that. And then last is to go back to the most important piece, which is we need our parents and our staff to play an advocacy role for Head Start and to make that a regular part of their activities and be confident that they can do that. Um, on the most basic level, advocacy for parents is really about how do I engage with my program and be an advocate for my child and understand my child's health. And if you haven't seen it, there is a really nice piece put out by OHS called Enhance Parents Advocacy and Leadership Skills, a guide for Head Start and early Head Start staff. And it's really about how do you keep promoting to parents their ability to speak up for themselves, speak up for the needs of their children, which is really the most basic step of being an advocate. And if we're going to grow parent advocates, that's where many of them are. So we talked about educating, advocating, and lobbying. So what is educating? Educating isn't just like teachers in a classroom giving reports. Educating in our language here is about letting people know about things and making them aware. So it's talking to people about things that you understand or things that matter. And in this case, it's your children, your Head Start program, and the impact that it has on both your families, but the other families and community. So when we're saying educating, that's the kind of educating we're talking about today. What's an example of education? Would be if you invite your state legislator and got them to tour your program, and then explain their needs, and then perhaps ask them to even hold a committee meeting about the particular, this case, we're talking about jobs training, but it could be Head Start, it could be policy council, it could be anything. But that's just about letting them know and understand. And honestly, we're talking today about advocacy, but on some level, this is an even larger part because we we need to always be communicating about Head Start, about who we are, because often we find out that people don't know who we are and that we haven't even just talked enough, been visible enough about being Head Start. So that's what basic education is. And any parent and staff is allowed to educate all the time, wherever they go as a person, either a Head Start parent or staff. Now, what you're not allowed to do is lobby. And lobbying is the exact same example I just gave, but and at the end of the visit, discuss a pending or proposed legislation on job training and encouraging them to support the legislation. So lobbying is trying to influence a legislator to vote on a bill or make a decision that they can do. And anybody can easily avoid that. Just don't ever talk to a legislator about, I want you to vote one way or another. And if you understand that, as a teacher, as a coordinator, as a parent, as any part of the Head Start program, then you don't have to worry that you're doing something you're not allowed to do, because lobbying is what you are not allowed to do. A little bit more about this. When is education lobbying? And it can be very cut and dry, but it talks about if education is done for the sole purpose of passing and defeating or introducing legislation, then it's lobbying and not educating. And the key other issue I want to identify here is that federal funds can't be used to do this. And that is the other key issue, is that you can't use federal funds. Someone trying to jump in there? I heard a voice.
Absolutely, personal. I'm still putting in my pockets now.
Someone needs to be patient, I think.
Are you sure?
All right, there you go. That's better. Um, let's move on to advocacy. Thank you. So advocacy is when someone describes the importance of Head Start to their family or to their program. Lobbying is when someone is paid to influence a legislator. So don't use your paid time to influence a legislator to vote one way or the other. Can we go to the head? Yes. So it was really interesting to me to look at what the Head Start Act said to remember this fresh. And the truth is that the Head Start Act says almost nothing about lobbying. It does say that employees cannot use their paid time to participate in political activities. So you can't go to a vote, a rally, or something else on your paid time, but I don't think anyone's doing that. But the bill that does influence this, the nitty gritty, is something called the Hatch Act. And there is actually a link to it, and there's a slide here. Um, yeah, on the ECLKC website, so that introduces the Hatch Act. If you want to go there and look at that later, we're going to share the PowerPoint and you'll have those links. Then there is a website that describes all the nitty-gritty of what the Hatch Act is about. So I'm going to talk about the Hatch Act so you feel confident you understand the Hatch Act. Next page. Um, the Hatch Act is governs what federal employees and programs that receive federal grant monies are allowed to do. And it says basically you're not allowed to use your program money to lobby or do political activities. So that the governing act that we're worried about is the Hatch Act. And I will remember the part that you're always allowed to do things on your non-work time. You're always as can advocate, educate, or lobby on your non-work time. You just can't use your federal money to go to Washington or produce a flyer saying, do this or vote for that. Next slide, please. Um, The other part that it does is it says that you are not allowed to use, if you're a leader in a program or the policy council president, that you're not allowed to use that position to do anything partisan. In other words, you're not allowed to say, as policy council president, we think this party is better than that party. You can't be partisan or use your position in Head Start. Um, and then the last part, in order to comply, it's pretty simple. Like I said, I've repeated it twice. Funding for the use of staff time cannot be used for lobbying. It can be used for educating, not lobbying. And that's really it. It's that simple. Um, Next slide, please. In the mode of keeping this simple, I want to go back to the basics, which is the biggest thing that you can do to promote Head Start is to be proud and loud about Head Start and how it impacts yourself, your children, your community, the families you work with, depending on who you are there. Um, and you don't have to worry about legislation. And even if there's legislation you're worried about, your leaders are smart enough to draw the dots. So all you have to do is tell your story, and they'll be smart enough to figure out what the right way is to vote on a bill. Also, you can leave that to your state association leaders or your program leaders if there really is a need for serious lobbying. Um, and the other part is to find time and opportunities to educate your community and political leaders about Head Start. So Sometimes I really agree with Courtney. We're trying to get every state senator, every senator and every representative in the US Congress to visit a program this year. That would be the most important thing that you could do. But the other part is if they're too busy, you can always go to their local office and have a visit with them. But there's no reason that all of you can't find ways and opportunities to educate your political leaders and community leaders about Head Start. And questions. How confused did I make people? Did it make sense to you? Are there particular activities you want to ask about? How is it looking to you? Katie, we have any questions in the chat?
We do not. I'm watching. Junior Goris had one earlier about being allowed to lobby as a community member, and you addressed that.
Yep. Yeah, you might see your Head Start director or some of your leaders in a program lobbying, but that is always because they found other funds and they're not using Head Start funds to lobby. They have to find other funds to do that. So because not even your program director can lobby using Head Start funds.
All right, we have a couple more. Thank you, Blair. How can state associations do advocacy as a board of directors?
Yeah, so I would work with your president or your executive director, and I would talk about two things. One is how can we're building a go team, meaning programs that are committed to doing advocacy with their representative or senators. And our one goal is to both build that team and have them host a visit of either that representative or the senator that they are partnered with. The other part is that we would gladly support any state association board that wants to think about what it could do on a state level, because now there's not only a lot happening in Washington where NHSA is focused, but in each state there are pre-K initiatives, there are childcare initiatives, there's homeless initiatives, and we would gladly help any board try to think about how would be the best way for them to advocate for Head Start within their particular state. So one is go team, making sure site visits are happening with all of your reps and senators. And then the third is to ask us how we can help you think about how to be advocating for Head Start within your state.
All right, thank you. We've got another one, fundraising. Can you talk a little bit, or is that beyond the scope of this call?
Could they be what kind of fundraising? Is there anything in particular that they're what?
This is
Yeah.
from Millie.
Yeah.
Let's give her a chance. While she is clarifying that, someone else wrote, so sharing links on our program Facebook page during work hours would be considered lobbying. I post for our program, but never with the words go vote. Just the link and leave it out there I do the same when I email policy council members. Here's the link, here's what's happening with Head Start, and I leave it up to them to act.
That in my estimation from your description is educating. And like you said it very well at the end, I leave it up to them to make decisions or how to act on that. But providing information, even providing information like there's a bill up for, for vote is fine, but you're leaving them up to make decisions. So I believe that's educating and would be completely fine, within your day to do that. Um, did we get a response? I actually have something to say about fundraising, but the person who asked that question came back to you with something more specific.
They did, but I might ask Courtney if we can take Millie off of mute for a moment because it's referring to fundraising, but then mentioning like I'm assuming a tax levy as the example. So I'm not sure what that means.
For example, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry. For example, if we wanted to get on the ballot at 0.5 mils per citizen for Miami County for Head Start, something like that, where we would approach the commissioners and ask if they would support our program.
that would be great. And you should work with us privately about how to do that. And that is definitely lobbying. And you would, but it's some of both, but a small part of it would definitely be lobbying, and you would need to figure out how to do that either in your non-work time or to raise funds to do that, so that you have money to, compensate you while you're doing that work. Um, the most common example we have about doing that is our dollar per child campaign. Um, and that money raise money for the National Head Start Association so we can do our lobbying and advocacy. There are states that do a 2-for-1 where they raise money and half of the money goes to their state board to do their state advocacy and the other half goes straight to NHSA. So you could look at, is there a campaign to be done within your state to raise that money? You also can do a campaign just straight up to raise money for that lobbying, and you can do all kinds of different things, so everything from bake sales to anything else. But if you are proposing a piece of legislation or funding for Head Start, that is definitely lobbying at that point.
Thank you.
Yep.
And then Guadalupe, I don't know if you want to come off of mute. You said great information to clarify the difference between lobbying and promoting your program. Did you need more clarification on that, or were you just making a statement that we're grateful for your feedback?
Yes, I was just making a statement because I do get a lot of questions from staff when we talk about voting, if that is something we're allowed to do. And the difference of lobbying and promoting people to go out and vote is very different. And so sometimes there's a fine line. And so it's great to be able to share this information, and hopefully, a lot of us on the call are learning something from it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Got about 5 more minutes. Any other questions?
Yeah.
All right, we've got one from Brandy. To confirm, Head Start staff are able to go to legislative meetings during work hours while we are educating about Head Start and how it impacts families and communities. We would not be encouraging voting one way or the other, simply informing about Head Start.
Brandy, shout out to Pennsylvania and PHSA, and yes, you have that correct. That's really clearly stated.
And Betty asks, what about fundraising in general?
That is a whole different webinar, and I would want to go back and check carefully about that. And also fundraising, yeah, I think that's a whole other topic, unless they have a specific thing about fundraising in general. All right.
Betty made a good point, like for Pampered Chef, for example. I don't know if you guys, I was a Pampered Chef consultant when I was pregnant with my second. And so they have these fundraising. You do a cooking demonstration, you sell products, and then you raise
Yep.
money.
All of those things can be done, but it's complicated within organizations, etc. And if you were going to do anything like that, before you did it, you should talk to your program director and be sure that you're not competing, there's not some issue with it. That's all. It's good.
And then Anne asks, outside of our representatives, who in our communities do you feel is most important to educate?
Hmm. It there are a number of places you can think about educating. Um, honest, but it depends on the state. Like in Pennsylvania, the county commissioners often had a lot of control just because of the way politics were. So you might have done that, but it's different in different states. So you have to look at who are the key leaders in your political environment that would influence Head Start. So that is a discussion for you to have with your state association and your state, people within your state to identify that. Um, the other part would be often we're described as siloed, like we tend to stick with Head Start, and it's a lot just to do our world. But the other people that may have an influence or you may partner with that still don't know that much about us are your other early learning partners, your AYCs, your other early childhood groups that may be people you want to partner with for advocacy, or maybe people that you want to partner in some way. And often they know of us, but they don't really know us enough to think about how we could work together. So they're another group often that Head Start directors spend some time educating, but don't know nearly as much as we'd like them to. These are great questions. All right.
So I was going to add, I'm adding it into the chat to Anne. Kara Waddell of Child Care Associates in Fort Worth, Texas, has done a lot of great educating within her community and has been able to increase early Head Start slots. I think 50 slots over 10 years or something, might even be 50 slots a year for 10 years. It's been a minute since I've looked at that. So that would be worth looking up as well, how they educated their community.
Yeah. All right. I think we will end by reminding people that if you haven't, there's still a few slots open for our fall leadership institute coming up in a couple weeks. And we have an events calendar. So if you ever want to check into what's happening, the events calendar is there with a QR code if you need it. And last but in no way least, our parent and family engagement conference coming up in San Diego, California this December the 16th to the 19th. I'd just like to end by thanking everybody and and also especially Katie and Courtney for all of their help and support and making it go well. So it's good. I think that's it. Thank you very much.